What if I told you that part of Jesus' teachings was deliberately hidden from humanity, not forgotten, not lost by accident, but intentionally removed from history? Now stop for a second and think, what if what you know today about Jesus is only a part of the original message? What if there are words attributed to him that were considered too dangerous to be divulged? This is an uncomfortable question, but absolutely necessary. For centuries, the official version of the story was carefully preserved by religious institutions. The four Gospels of the New Testament were chosen as the foundation of the Christian faith. But what few people know is that dozens of other texts also existed, and they were rejected, called Gnostic Gospels. These writings present a radically different view of Jesus' teachings. They don't focus only on miracles or rules of conduct, but on something much deeper: awakening. And here begins the real mystery. In 1945, in the Egyptian desert, a collection of ancient manuscripts was found buried in clay jars. This discovery, known as the Nag Hammadi Library, revealed texts that had been hidden for almost 2,000 years. But why hide something like that? The content of these Gospels suggests that the kingdom of God is not outside, but within each human being. That the true spiritual path does not depend on temples, rituals, or external authorities, but on self-knowledge. Now think about the impact of this. If each person could access the divine for themselves, what would be the role of religious institutions? Who would control the truth? Perhaps that is precisely why these texts were considered a threat. But here is the most intriguing point. These teachings did not disappear. They were silenced, and now they are resurfacing at a time when millions of people are beginning to question everything that once seemed absolute. And this leads us to an inevitable question. Are we finally ready to learn what has been hidden for so long? In the next section, you will discover who the Gnostics were, and why their ideas were seen as dangerous enough to be erased from history. Now that you know these texts existed, the next question is inevitable. Who were the people behind these teachings? The Gnostics were not a single group or organized like a traditional church. In fact, they were diverse, spread across different regions, but they shared an extremely powerful central idea: that true spiritual knowledge came from within. The word gnosis means precisely that: direct knowledge, personal experience with the divine. But here's the detail that changed everything. While many religious currents taught that salvation came through faith, obedience, or the mediation of spiritual leaders, the Gnostics believed that each human being already carried within themselves a divine spark. In other words, you didn't need an intermediary to connect with God. Now imagine the impact of this idea at the time. Message like this not only empowered the individual, it also completely weakened any structure based on centralized spiritual authority. And that's exactly where the conflict begins. The Gnostics didn't blindly follow external rules. They sought understanding. They questioned, they investigated, and above all, they valued direct experience, something that couldn't be easily controlled. But that wasn't all. Some Gnostic texts presented even more radical ideas. They suggested, for example, that the material world was not the creation of a perfect, supreme God, but rather of an inferior entity, a kind of imperfect architect. This called into question not only religious interpretations, but the entire vision of reality. And, as you can imagine, this went too far. These ideas began to be seen as dangerous, subversive, even threatening to the social and religious order of the time. And, over time, religious leaders began to condemn these teachings more and more intensely. The Gnostics were labeled heretics. Their texts began to disappear. Their teachings were silenced. But here is the most curious point of all. If these ideas were merely false or worthless, why was there so much effort to erase them completely? Why not just ignore them? Perhaps because, deep down, they carried something much more powerful than they appeared. Something that, if understood, could completely change the way we see spirituality and even ourselves. And in the next section, you will learn about some of the most intriguing passages from these Gospels. words attributed to Jesus that challenge everything we know. Now comes the most intriguing part of this whole story. What exactly do these Gospels say? What are the teachings attributed to Jesus that were considered too dangerous to be included in the Bible? Prepare yourself, because some of these ideas are, even today, deeply provocative. One of the best-known texts is the Gospel of Thomas. Unlike the traditional Gospels, it doesn't present a narrative with a beginning, middle, and end. Instead, it presents a collection of phrases supposedly spoken by Jesus, and one of them is particularly striking. If those who guide you say, "The kingdom is in heaven," then the birds will arrive before you. If they say, "It is in the sea," then the fish will arrive first. But the kingdom is within you, and outside. Now stop and absorb that for a moment. That phrase, alone, already defies centuries of religious interpretation. Here, Jesus doesn't point to a distant place, but to an internal, accessible, present reality. And this raises a powerful question. If the divine is within you, what exactly do you need to seek outside? But it doesn't stop there. Another passage states, "Know thyself, and thou shalt know the universe and the gods." Do you see the pattern? The focus is not on worshiping something external, but on awakening something internal. These teachings suggest that the greatest mystery is not in heaven, but in human consciousness itself. And perhaps that is precisely what makes them so uncomfortable. Because, if they are true, they completely change the way we see authority, faith, and spirituality. But here comes the most intense point. Some Gnostic texts indicate that Jesus transmitted secret teachings only to a few disciples, Suchostomus, Mary Magdalene, and others. Teachings that were not intended for the masses, but for those who were ready to understand. This creates a clear division. There is the public message and the hidden message, and it is precisely this hidden message that has almost disappeared from history. Now think about it. How many other ideas might have been left out? How many interpretations have been shaped over time to serve specific interests? This is not a simple theory. It's a provocation, and it leads to an inevitable point, true climax of this discussion. What if Jesus' greatest teaching was never about following, but about awakening? In the next and final section, we will close this puzzle and understand what all this means for you today. After all this, we arrive at the most important point. What do these teachings really mean today? Because, in the end, this isn't just a historical or theological discussion. It's not just about ancient texts found in the desert, or about decisions made almost 2,000 years ago. It's about you. The Gnostic Gospels raise a powerful and at the same time uncomfortable possibility that spiritual truth may never have been completely outside, but always inside. And if that's true, then everything changes. The way you see your faith changes. The way you see yourself changes. The way you seek meaning in life also changes. Because instead of looking for answers only in external authorities, you begin to look inward more attentively. But here's the challenge. Looking inward isn't easy. There's no ready-made manual. There's no completely defined path. And perhaps that's exactly why this type of teaching has been set aside for so long. It demands responsibility. It demands questioning. It demands courage. And not everyone is prepared for that. But at the same time, there has never been a time when so many people were beginning to ask these questions. There has never been so much access to information. There have never been so many people questioning absolute truths, seeking meaning beyond what has been taught. And perhaps this is no coincidence. Perhaps it is the moment when these ideas finally find space to resurface. Not as a replacement for what already exists, but as a complement, as a new way of seeing the old. Now, the final question is no longer about the texts. It's about you. What do you do with this knowledge? Do you ignore it? Ask, has been done for centuries? Or do you decide to explore more deeply what can transform your own perception of reality? Because, in the end, perhaps the greatest teaching has never been hidden from you. Perhaps it has always been there waiting to be recognized. If this video made you reflect, question, or see something in a different way, then it was already worth it. But this journey doesn't end here. If you want to continue exploring themes like this, ancient mysteries, hidden knowledge, and profound reflections on existence, subscribe to the channel now and activate the notification bell. Because there's much more to come, and the next video might change the way you see the world.